Hi, this is Julia with Stork'd, the podcast, in which we explore the many ways to build and define family. I'm thrilled to introduce our next guest, Annie. Annie has a company that writes the narratives of prospective adoptive parents to help a birth parent select the family in which to place a child. In addition, she and her husband recently adopted a beautiful daughter, and she has a lot to say about the subject of adoption. And before we get to Annie's story, I want to give a quick note about the theme of adoption in Stork'd. It's one of those very deeply emotional and tricky subject matters to cover. And I suppose you could say that about almost any one of our subject matters, but this one just cuts to the core of identity and feelings of being secure, loved, nurtured, wanted is a really important theme that I've noticed from some of our subjects. And it's interesting to me because the podcast actually started with my own exploration of adoption. If you recall from season one, episode one, I started this podcast immediately after coming back from this remarkable trip to Colombia with my cousin and her father. And we were there visiting my cousin's orphanage, the place in which she was adopted from. There, I witnessed the most beautiful and tender and loving moment between a parent and child imaginable. And it was just so stunning that your heart just exploded with love in the witnessing of it. That was one of the early genesises or the early initiators for this podcast. And in season two, we explored the topic a lot with several grown adoptees. We had one or two in season one and quite a few in season two. And it's clear from these stories, although they're not representative of the entire population of adopted adults, but that there could be a lot of pain that comes from being adopted and feeling unwanted or feeling unloved or feeling like you were not somebody's first choice. In fact, the world of adoption has changed quite a bit, the way in which we think about placing children, how we place them, to whom, etc. And so, the way in which we have to discuss adoption and the way we parent adopted children has to change. One thing that's for sure is that we can't talk about adopting a child as being a backup plan because that's just so painful for the child to feel like second best. What I love about Annie's story is that never did she think about adoption as her second choice. It was always her first choice. It was something that was really important to her from the beginning. And so here we've got this beautiful narrative. I'll let her tell it in her own words of somebody who chose adoption first. And she's going to share with us a little bit about her journey to consider adoption, to become an adopted parent. And she's also going to share a little bit about her work helping babies and families connect. And don't forget, if you love the podcast, please share it with your friends, give a good review, and maybe sign up for the newsletter. Here's Annie. Annie, welcome to Stork'd, the podcast, in which we explore the many ways to build and define family. I'm really excited to get to know a little bit about how your family came together and your journey and what you're doing right now. If you could start with a little introduction so that our audience can get to know you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So I'm Annie B. Compton, and I am a huge fan of cleaning, which I know nobody is, but that's I absolutely enjoy. I love being outdoors, swimming, and cooking for friends and family. And I love being a mom more than anything and a storyteller.
Oh, that's great. And that is probably one of the better descriptions to start right off the bat with. I love cleaning.
You know what? I had to get real honest with myself when it was like, let's really learn about who you are. I was like, what do I do in all of my free time that brings me joy? And it's cleaning. And everybody who really knows me knows that, but I wouldn't tell that to the average person. I'm just trying to be more truthful in life right now.
I love that. So, is there something that prompted the decision to be more truthful in life right now, or is it just like a general openness?
I think as I've gotten older, but also becoming a mom, I'm like, I have to be real in all of these situations. And I just feel like authenticity is so much more fun to be around. And as I aged, was like, why would I not be who I am? Like, I've spent a lot of time people pleasing as a woman. I've been, people pleasing to get jobs, to do the things that I want to do. And finally, I'm like, this is who I am. And I want to find people that meet me exactly where I'm at and not like, you know, presentational person.
The word storyteller came up in your introduction. And I know that to be true from your professional life. Can you tell us a little bit about what being a storyteller means for you and how it shows up for you?
Oh, yes. So professionally, I have worked as a writer in film and television, and I wrote on The Young and the Restless, which is what most people would like know. And it was a really incredible experience. And I've written a movie that Jeremy Irons and Maria Bello and Alex Sharp were in, which was an incredible experience. And my storytelling kind of has evolved. I will always be telling stories that I hope will turn into television shows and movies. But now I also help tell the stories of families that are hoping to adopt by making adoption profiles for them that they then use to share with expectant mothers as they hope to grow their family through adoption. And so I feel like storytelling for me will always evolve and change and shift because I think you can use that skill in so many different ways.
Yeah, I really like the power that you're talking about with using stories first to connect to people in an entertaining way, movies and TV. I think sometimes we underestimate how important and valuable those are. But coming out of a pandemic where they were the one human experience we all shared, into doing something that's really got a huge impact on how families are built, that's a very interesting career shift.
Yeah, I feel like I'm kind of doing them both hand in hand right now, which is amazing. But I drop everything when a family needs us to tell their story. That's my priority because it also, ties into how I grew my family. And it came to be because that's how I grew my family.
Well, why don't we talk a little bit about that?
So I recently became a mom 6 months ago through adoption. And it was, to me, it felt like a long process. It was over a year. However, that is a very short process in truth for most families that are going through the adoption process. Private domestic adoption. I have to clarify that I,
It's a good clarity.
there's
Yeah.
many different routes of adoption, and that was ours. And I have always wanted to adopt since I was a child. I never really envisioned growing my family biologically. So when it came to the idea of growing a family and wanting to become a parent, it was adoption first for me. And my husband and I had a lot of talks about how we would grow our family. And we both felt like adoption was a good route for us. At that time, we were slightly educated. We knew some adoptees. We knew some adoptive parents. I knew one birth parent that had placed a child. But I thought I was educated. But as we went through the process, I've become more and more educated. And every day I'm still getting educated about the process. And as we learned, we felt like, yes, this would be how we wanted to grow our family.
Yeah. So, would you mind if I dug into that a little bit with you? I think the word adoption first as a way to describe what felt intuitively and naturally like the way you wanted to build to grow your family is really fascinating. It's fascinating for two reasons. Some of the adoptees I've had the privilege of speaking with have shared that sometimes they feel like the last resort. Like you try biologically, it doesn't work. One comment I've heard is that it can be hurtful to feel like you're a last choice. But in your case, you're saying you're a first choice. Can you tell us about how did you know that that was the choice that you wanted to make? Where did that come from?
What you just said about talking to adoptees, we have also heard that. And it's interesting because that's not our story. We didn't struggle with fertility. And I know so many people do. And I know that that's such a difficult and hard road. For us, we didn't even try. I think my desire to adopt started because I've always felt that there's so many children in the
Mhm.
world that aren't necessarily mine that I love to give love to. I was a big sister through Big Brothers Big Sisters Los Angeles, and my little sister touched my heart in a way that I never ever imagined. She became my little sister when she was 12, I believe, 11, 12. It's been long because now she's about to be 19 and she has a room at our house. She is a huge part of our lives. We went through the toughest, teenage years with her, and we just fell in love with my little sister and it became like family. She spent holidays with us. She was in our wedding. And as she was graduating high school, I was thinking, oh my gosh, I was feeling empty nest. It's so funny, but we had kind of talked about growing our family at that time, but because my little sister was so involved in our lives, it felt like we had a child. And as she moved out and got her own apartment and all of that, I was really desiring to parent again. And knowing how much I love my little sister, she, she's not biologically mine. She has an amazing mom. She has an amazing family. And I knew that I was able to, kind of co parent with her mom in a way that I knew that family could look so many different ways. And so adoption felt like, yeah, I absolutely could do this. And we were super excited about doing an open adoption and have a relationship with our child's biological family. And so it felt like a really easy transition to that for us.
Did you involve her in the decision-making process around adoption? Did you sit down and talk to her about, like, "This is what we're thinking about. How do you feel about it?" What was her involvement there?
Yeah, we told my little sister that we were adopting, and I think it hit her in a way that she was super excited for us and super happy for us. But I think she always was like, oh, I'm the only child in this household. But she has now fully embraced being, we call her a big sister now. So, and she's not in our home and she'll come over and our daughter like just clings to her in such a beautiful way. So we're really happy that they get along so well.
Tell me about the conversation with your husband, because you knew at a gut level that this was the right path for you and possibly for your family. Did it take some conversations, negotiation, and buy-in from him? Was he with you right off the bat? Sometimes making a decision as a couple around these big family moments can be a little tricky.
Yeah, they can be. I think the thing is that by the time I had arrived at the decision that I was like, we're ready, let's do this, I had been really educated about the process because I was reading a lot of books, I was talking to people, I was really being investigatory. And I wasn't bringing my husband along on that process at that moment. And so when I brought it to him, he was definitely open. He was not like, heck no. He was definitely open, but he needed to become more educated about it. And it was kind of amazing because going through when you adopt, you have to go through a home study process. But then we had the privilege of working with an adoption consultant, and our consultant really like handheld us and educated us so much in a way that I thought I had already prepared through the home study. And that's when my husband really understood the gravity of adoption and the beauty and the excitement around it. Because in the beginning of an adoption process, it can feel kind of invasive and different than how maybe if you were to grow your family biologically, you don't have people coming to your house and making sure you have fencing up and those types of things. And I think that when that was happening, my husband was like, what's this?
Yeah.
But he was amazing through it. And now he's just like next level obsessed with our daughter. It's been such an exciting journey.
That's so great. That's interesting. The fencing thing is an interesting component. So, what I'm assuming you're talking about are these little tiny preparatory safety things to make sure the child is placed in a very healthy and happy home and will be safe in their environment, which frankly, you don't do biologically. It happens. And then one day you're like, oh gosh, I need to baby proof the house or whatever. What were some of the surprising moments, either about the adoption process or about actually now having an adopted child that came up for you either positively or negatively?
I think honestly, I'm still surprised sometimes. I feel like all parents feel this way, whether you have an adopted child or a biological child, or, there's so many different ways that you can have a child. I feel like there's a lot of surprises along the way, just based on who your child is and their personality. But with adoption, I would say a lot of the surprises came for me and still come for me is the lack of education. Even if you are an approved adoptive parent, fully knowing about all facets of the adoption world. Like Time Magazine just came out with this really big article about kind of like the dark side of domestic private adoption and how many unlicensed places have been able to participate in facilitating adoption and how it's really become a very commodified industry that is kind of gross because you're commodifying people and reckoning with those types of terrible things around domestic private adoption has been hard also, but good. It's super necessary for there to be a lot more awareness around this. I also think what's been surprising for us is that many people that in our lives, we know a lot of adoptees, we know a lot of adoptive parents. And like I said, I knew a birth parent, but now that we are open with our adoption, we have to be. Our daughter is not our skin tone. So are transracial adoptive parents. So it's obvious, we are a family that doesn't look alike. So people come up and say, I'm adopted too, or I'm an adoptive mom, or I was a birth parent. And people in our lives that I've known for over a decade that have not shared that they were adopted have come into our life and been offering so much support and insight. And that's been really amazing and surprising to me.
Is so great. And, I find that I've said this other times in other parts of my life that when you're willing to share and be open about something that's a little bit vulnerable, sometimes taboo, the people who come out and say, oh, you know what, me too, or I want to talk to you about this or whatever. And so I just love that you, by visually demonstrating the power of adoption in your family and also by talking so openly about it, have created this ripple effect in your community.
Yeah, I think it's been really great for us. And, I am protective at the same point because I want my daughter to be able to tell her story. So I don't share her story fully because I think it's so important for her to decide how she wants to share it and how she wants to be seen in this family.
Now that's really interesting because she's very young. So how do you raise a child who can claim their story? And how do you teach a very young child what to communicate and to whom and how?
It's a process. I think we lean on a lot of people in the adoption community to help guide us through this process. Our daughter will always know that she's adopted. We will always tell her story and we will always tell it at appropriate age levels so that she can, you know, take it in at the age that she is. So we're not going to jump in and say, here's all of the details and blah, blah, blah with a young age. But she will know. We're lucky because we also have a relationship with her birth family and her birth mom. And so we hope that she'll know them as well so that she can also learn her story from them in a different perspective. And, we are also going to engage professionals along the way that will help us through the process as well, because we are not naive to the fact that with adoption, there's trauma.
Mm.
And in a transracial adoption, there's trauma. And we want her to have the tools to be able to articulate her emotions around that. So we will be guiding her with the help of others.
Yeah, I'm curious about how you think about raising a child who looks a little different from you and how you prepare yourself for that. It sounds to me like you're thinking about the trauma that comes along with the adoption process. What else are you thinking about and what else are you paying attention to?
The biggest thing for me is activism. I think that I have so much privilege and that it's really on us to do the work and support people and get active and not just post things on social media and read white fragility and then lay in our bed and feel bad for being white. And to me, I have become relentless in how can I make this world a better place for my child? And not only just for my child, for everyone because I want to leave the world a better place,
Hmm.
when I'm gone, but also to know that I fought to make it a better place for my daughter. And I think it's twofold for me because it's sad to me that I've gotten so aggressive about it now that I have a child, that I wasn't this aggressive prior to it. I was involved. I've learned so much. And I think for me, it's about activism and also making sure that my daughter is not just othered all the time,
Hmm.
and finding situations where she is fully seen and I am the minority in the room.
Can you give some examples of how you're doing that? Does it include where she goes to school or what other adults are around her? Like, how do you think about creating a community that looks like her?
For us, it's about school, about activities that she'll participate in. It's the friends and family that look like her in our lives, that we spend time in their homes and that she sees that. It's church. It's everywhere that we can.
Yeah.
It's a top priority in our family now.
So it sounds like you're really spending time intentionally weaving a fabric around her of diverse faces and diverse people, et cetera, so that she doesn't always have to feel alone.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like I hope that she will be able to also have friendships with other adoptees that are in families like ours so that she can say, "Ugh, what's up with these guys?"
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm curious, generally speaking, this is a very tricky thing because it comes at the intersection of family dynamics, childhood trauma, whether it's your own that you're passing on or your daughter's from her adoptive experience, and this like zeitgeist in our nation where we are all maybe reckoning, maybe not reckoning with racial identity right now. And so you sort of have to sit at that and parent through it. I'm curious if you have any advice for anyone else who's parenting in a similar way or places that you're seeking information or books you're turning to or resources.
Okay, I'll say this. I have no advice because I don't think I'm an expert on it. And I don't think anybody is because I don't think you'll ever know exactly how your child feels. I do think there's amazing resources, though, that we definitely turn to. I think what a lot of adoptive parents should turn to is the adoptee community. I think a lot of adoptive parents actually want to turn away from listening to some adoptees because some of this information that they're willing to share feels scary, to hear that I
Yep.
felt othered when I was growing up in my household.
Yeah.
I didn't feel seen. I didn't feel embraced. I wished that I had grown up in a family that looked like me. You know, that's hard to hear for some parents because they think, oh, we love our child so much. And we don't want to hear that negativity. But I think it's so important to listen to people who've walked the path as opposed to what you hope or wish it will be.
I think that's so true. In general, I think sometimes you hear these hard stories and you say, "Well, I'll do it differently. It won't be my family. It won't be that." But so what I'm hearing you say by way of advice, quote unquote, is to listen and to find the voices who are telling their stories and try and understand. When you have a little bit more understanding of what someone could go through as a child who has been adopted, how does that translate into your parenting? How do you take the information and turn that into action?
You know, I think it's gonna be a dated time for us. I think our daughter's really young right now, so we haven't necessarily had to face any conversations with her. We've had to face conversations with people around us about adoption and about their misconceptions and judgments around adoption. And I feel like we wanna be as intentional as possible with what we do. I recognize we're probably going to make a ton of mistakes. And I think that I hope that our daughter will have grace with us and that when we mess up that we're going to claim our mistake and try to do better. And I think that that's hopefully what all parents can try to do, whether you're a biological parent or an adoptive parent.
It's a beautiful answer. You mentioned the word misconceptions. What are some of the misconceptions that have been shared with you about the adoption community or the adoption process?
The number one thing is your daughter's so lucky. My
Ah,
daughter is not lucky. She has the right to be loved unconditionally. If she would have been raised by her birth mother, she would have been raised beautifully. She would have been loved wholly. Every child is not lucky to be born and loved. That is just a right. I think that when people say she's so lucky, I turn around and I say, we're so lucky. We're the lucky ones. Like, I do not take my extreme privilege to be able to have adopted in domestic private adoption. The other thing is that people think they're really doing, a service
mhm.
being an adoptive parent. You're not in private domestic adoption. There's 36 usually waiting families to each child that is possibly being considered for placement. So there isn't this desperate need for adoptive parent. And it's also a very expensive endeavor that people don't realize as well. So it is definitely a place where many very privileged people have the ability to become parents this way. I think those are some misconceptions. I also think that when we were starting to share with people that we were going through the adoption process, many people volunteered negative information like, oh, well, did you know Roger down the street is adopted and he's institutionalized? Um,
God, that's really not helpful.
it's not helpful, and I also think that many people like to categorize people based on how they were brought into the world or what family they were brought into, and I find that to be really terrible, and I feel like people need to be more aware of how some other person's family might be. And like we have learned, there's many people in our lives that have shared that they were adopted now that they know that we've gone through the process that haven't told people that they were adopted. And I think it might be because there's ridiculous, stigmas and stereotypes around it. So those are some of the misconceptions. And I also think a lot of the time people, in my experience, to think of the birth family negatively. And that to me is deplorable. We are parents because of our birth mother and our birth father. Our birth mother is the most incredible person ever. I love her unconditionally. I will fight for her forever. She made me a mom. It's like, I think that that's the other thing is like people want to go, oh, what was the birth parents' problem? Like, why couldn't they? And it's A, none of anybody's business, but B, birth parents are incredible. I would love people just for a moment to kind of put themselves in that position and see if they had the strength, courage, bravery, and unconditional love to do that.
What you're sharing is so important because what you're speaking to is this general misconception or this general perception that a birth parent is unwilling or unable to parent. And therefore, the child would have been in a very unhealthy situation were it not for these angelic humans who come in and rescue the child. And I think that's been the narrative for quite some time. I'm not sure where it started. I should probably do some research on it, and you might know. But I do think like dispelling that narrative is really an important thing for us all to be doing.
I think it's really important to get educated about that because I think there's so much unheard in the adoption world. And I think that adoptive parents, because of their privilege, become really outspoken about stuff. I feel like, when I'm on Instagram, the algorithm or whatever loves to be like, look at this adoptive family. And there's all of these, like, just like really posh people talking about their perspective as an adoptive parent all the time. Oh, I'm amazing. I'm an adoptive parent. And I just want to be like, "Woo!"
Yeah.
Just, like there's a triad here that may do that, family. And if you do have this platform that people are following you, I hope you're raising the voices of adoptees and birth parents so that adoptive parents don't think they're just like stepping into this cloud of exactly what you said, like, "Ah, I'm a rescue angel,
Yeah. Yeah. So I recognize, and I'm hearing a lot of sensitivity to not sharing your daughter's adoption story and not sharing the birth parents or birth mom's story because it's not yours to claim. But if you were to share a little bit about your story or whatever you feel comfortable communicating to our audience, can you tell us a little bit about how this wonderful child came to be in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I was saying earlier, there is a process to becoming an adoptive parent. And for us, we went through a home study here. I live in California, and every state has different, you know, prerequisites and requests of adoptive families. And with us, it was having multiple home studies where a social worker comes into our home and interviews us.
What happened next? Where did that go?
So we became approved, which felt like an unbelievable experience because you're just doing so much. And then you get this letter that, like, you're approved. And ah, such a huge breath of fresh air. And then what happens?
Did you think, just to interrupt for a second, did you have any doubts that you would be approved? Were you nervous
Of
about that?
course. I mean, I don't know how anybody can be under a microscope. And I'm not the type of person that's like walks in and is like, I got this. Kill it, you know?
Yeah.
And especially when, to me, I think of building a family so sacredly. So I was hoping that they would be at least critical. So I was so relieved because it's nerve wracking too, because you don't get to see the letters of recommendation that people
Ah.
and get to hear the phone conversation they had. You know, the doctor doesn't share what their assessment is of you.
That's so funny because my friends have asked me to write letters for them, and I always send it over to them. I'm always like, "Here's what I wrote. Is it okay?" Like, of course I have to submit it first because they
Like,
can't have any influence on what I say, but once it's submitted, I've always sent it over.
yeah, it's funny. It's like one of my best friends wrote us one, and I have never seen it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, we were just elated when we were approved. And then the process takes another turn because then you are presented cases, situations about expectant parents or expectant mothers. And it's dependent on who you're working with. So you may learn about the expectant parent's health background, you may not. You may learn about what they do, their hopes and dreams, their hobbies, you may not. Might learn the gender of the child that is with their
It's coming.
you know, that's coming. And you may not know the gender. You may not know the health. There are situations that you really have to examine what's given to you. And then you have to decide if that's a case that you would like to present for. And when you present, you use a profile. And in that profile, it's usually your story, your family's story, and basically what you envision your life with a child would look like. And then the expectant parent gets a stack. Sometimes they get 10, sometimes they get 300. And they then sometimes choose to place their child with a family that they have looked at a profile.
Oh gosh. So it is a sort of a double blind matching to some extent, or it is a matching process. And
Yeah.
I imagine that there's some really key decision moments for both parties. I'm curious. I think you sit at a really interesting intersection personally because you've written your profile and you've had to make an evaluation about which ones you see are the right fit for your family. And then you also help people write their profiles in hopes of sharing the right information so that a birth parent can make a good decision.
Mhm.
So, when you think about this both and decision process, can you tell us a little bit about how you were evaluating the decision? And then we can talk later about how you help story tell so that others can evaluate their decision.
I think the biggest part for us when we were evaluating whether a situation would be a right fit for our family or not, we really had to talk to professional people about whether the situation would be right for us or not. And that's what we had to do is look at situations and go, can we support this situation fully, wholly, unconditionally?
And how did it feel when you were chosen to be the adopted parents for your daughter?
I mean, I still cry about it. I'm like getting emotional already. It was the best feeling of my entire life. It was we had been hopeful in a few other situations and weren't chosen. And it was really heartbreaking when we
Yeah.
weren't chosen. And when we were chosen, it was like I'll tell you the story of when I heard we were chosen. I had been at the vet. We have 2 dogs, and they're like our children, fully children, and I was worried about our dogs because they had been puking, and I was like, "Oh my god, my dogs are dying," like, so emotional about this because they're always healthy and, was
Yeah.
super stressed out, and the vet had just brought the dogs out, said, "They're fine. They just, like, they ate something yucky and, you know, they'll be fine. Here's some medication and you can go." And so I felt a huge sense of relief. And within 2 minutes of getting the dogs back in the car, we got the call that we had been chosen. And
Oh,
I was in such a state of relief that my dogs were going to be okay, but also just so excited that I started swearing like a blue streak, like just like crazy swearing at my adoption agent. And she was laughing because I was thinking, oh my gosh, she probably never gets. I mean, I was screaming. I was like, can I swear on this?
go for it.
I was like, "Are you fucking kidding me? This is the best fucking news ever. Oh my fucking god!" Like
Yeah.
F-bomb, F-bomb, F-bomb. So it was an incredible feeling. And for us, our situation was we found out on a Thursday night and our baby was being born on a Tuesday morning.
Oh, so you didn't have a lot of time to prepare.
Not have a lot of time to prepare. So that was also the excitement too, because it was like this huge adrenaline rush of like, we're about to be parents in less than 5 days.
That's amazing. Who did you call first?
So we called my parents and then we called his parents and we were like, you're going to be grandparents. And they were shocked because we had told no one that we had even put our profile forward.
That's
So
amazing.
yeah, it was really exciting.
So we talk about you being a storyteller. We talk about this process where a parent who is possibly pregnant and going through a major life decision about possibly giving up a child.
I'm going to correct you on that.
Okay.
Placing a child.
Okay, actually let's talk about that. So tell me where I went wrong. So giving up is a framework that seems old-fashioned maybe. Tell me about the word placing. Why is that an important word?
The importance of the word placing is because actually adoption was a form of slavery back in the day. It was started with an adoption train where children were taken from their biological families and put on a platform to be
Oh,
basically
wow.
sold to other families for farm help and whatnot. So when people use the word put up for adoption or give up for adoption, it has that negative connotation. So placing is that a woman or a father or a parent, whoever is expecting the child, is choosing to place a child in an adoptive home.
Thank you so much for making that correction. And I think it's a really important one that we make sure is captured. So let me rephrase that using my new terminology.
Great.
When somebody is making the very hard choice of placing a child and where to place a child, these stories that you help write presumably are very important. What are some of the things that you extract or like to communicate about hopeful families?
So, kind of full circle at the beginning of our chat, I was talking about authenticity and truthfulness. There, I think that going through the adoption process really highlighted that for me because I think it's so important for families to be authentically who they are and truthful when presenting to expectant parents. Because I think it's super important for expectant parents to actually visualize in their head, do I want my child to grow up with these people and this family?
Yes. And how do you know, like, how do you communicate what it would be like for a child to grow up with that family?
Well, my cousin Julia and I run a company that makes profiles. And what we have found that is important to talk about in profiles is the individuals who are adopting about who they are, what their likes are, what their dislikes are, what their maybe their job is. But I find their job to be the least important part about them. I
Yeah.
find the qualities in them to be the most important part. And then we talk about the story of if you're in a partnership in adopting, the partnership story or the single person's story, kind of their origin story of who they are and how they came to be. We love to highlight people's homes, their
Mm.
neighborhoods, what they do for fun, what their values are. I think is one of the most important pages in a profile is saying these are the things that I want to teach my child. These are the values that I will be persistent and consistent with in my household. And then we also include what a family promises,
What does
what
that mean, a family promises?
what they promise to do as a parent, which I think a lot of people don't think about. Like, what do you promise that you're going to do for your child and for this beautiful birth family? Do you promise to show up for your child every day and to embrace them for who they are and find opportunities for that child and their desires and their passions? And I think it's really important for families to articulate what they're capable of giving.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. So, how many families have you worked with in this context as a storyteller on their behalf?
We worked with many, many families at this
Yeah.
which has been incredible. And we've learned so much about the many different families that exist out there. And that's been so incredible for us because every family looks very differently and every family has different hopes, dreams, and desires. And that's been really cool to see and just see how beautiful everybody is. And I think that's what also would be so difficult as an expected parent how to choose. And I
Yeah.
think that's what happens though is that if you're presented authentically, an expectant parent will feel into that and they'll know if you're the right choice. And I think that that's what's so interesting for my husband and I. Our birth mother, I just know another entity had something to do with why we were brought together because it was so perfect. And I believe because we tried to present ourselves as authentically as possible, that our birth mom felt into that and she knew in her bones that we were the right match. And I hope that other expectant parents feel that way when they look at a profile. And just, I also, on the flip side, want adoptive parents to know that as well. It's like
Yeah.
you may be disappointed that you're not chosen, but you will be chosen by the person that's right for you.
That's right. That's a beautiful reminder. And as somebody who has seen so many different families, their hopes, their dreams, their promises, and helped build families in addition to your own, what's your definition of family?
My definition of family is just love. I just feel like it's something within your bones that happen. It's something within your heart that happens. My little sister who's through a program, big brothers, big sisters is my family. My best friend up the street who has dinner with us 4 nights a week, he's my family. My daughter's my family. My dogs are my family. And I feel like blood cannot define that. Blood sometimes does. You put more effort in sometimes to blood family because you want to. But I think it's just all about how you choose to love, and that's who becomes family.
So when you're telling your daughter about how you guys became a family, how do you articulate it to her?
You know, I tell her that her birth mom made us a family.
Oh, that's really
That
sweet.
that's who made us a family. And I never take that for granted, ever. She's the most important person in my life, my daughter and my birth mom.
Wow, well, those are powerful concepts and words to end on. If somebody were looking to use your services in an effort to find their own family, to encourage or present themselves authentically so that a birth parent, a birth mom could choose them, how do they find you?
It is called Cuore Mio Co. Cuore Mio means from the heart in Italian. I'm half Italian. And so it's cuoremioco.com. CUOREMIOCO.com.
Excellent. And do you have social media or anything we can follow you on?
Same handle, Cuore Mio Co. on Instagram.
Perfect. Well, it has been such a pleasure to speak with you. I do feel like this conversation could have been like 2 or 3 or 5 or 20 times the amount of time that we were able to talk today, but we really appreciate your time today.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been so delightful.
It's been amazing.
Thank you for listening to Stork'd with your host, Julia Carroll. This podcast is changing the conversation around the ways people define and create family. If you like what you hear, please support us by sharing with friends and following on Instagram at Stork'd_podcast. We also always appreciate it when you rate and review us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For more information, visit storkedpodcast.com to sign up for our newsletter. That's STORKD podcast.com.
Hello, Stork'd family. Did you know that the FDA does not require tampon brands to provide a full list of ingredients on their boxes? Yeah, seriously. That's why so many of the big names use the disclaimer, may contain, before they list all these synthetic ingredients like rayon, polyester, and fragrance. It's time you meet Lola. They're always up front, even on the back of the box. Founded by women with sky-high standards who think that what they put on and in our bodies matters. Lola offers period, sexual wellness, and vaginal health essentials made with high-quality, natural ingredients. Gynecologist-approved, clean products that are by your side during every stage of your life. Find exactly what you need at mylola.com, Amazon, Walmart, and select retailers nationwide.